Hi, I'm Mark with Crown & Caliber, and welcome to Hidden Gems. When the Code 1159 came out in January 2019, it was all over the internet for probably not the right reasons. It was not a big hit at first. Sometimes a hidden gem isn't something that is buried in the past that we should take a second look at. Sometimes it's something right now that's out in current production that deserves a second look because maybe the first impression wasn't the best. This is the Code 1159. So let's get into it. So I already know there are going to be people who see Code 1159, go to the comment section and tell us why they don't like it. That's fine, but for everyone else who actually wants to watch the video, let's go a little deeper. Let's start with Audemars Piguet in general. They actually started out in the 1870s, relatively young for a big Swiss watch brand. But they've always been at the forefront of high horology, not just finishing, but complications. And that is really where they made their bones. Even early on, when they're coming out with complications, when Audemars and Piguet were around, it was Omega coming to them for saying, hey, we want to create the first minute repeater wristwatch, which was technically under Omega's name, but Audemars Piguet built it for them. They created the first jump hour watch. They created the first skeletonized watch. It's who they are, it's in their DNA. The history of Audemars Piguet kind of trudges along and really doesn't boom as a company until the 1970s, when every other watchmaker is having problems with the quartz crisis. Audemars Piguet does something big, bold, and kind of radical. Drop the gold, drop the fancy dress watch, create a steel sports watch, and charge twice as much as a gold watch. Shouldn't have worked. Shouldn't have worked at all, except it did. What Audemars Piguet famously came out with was the Royal Oak. And it was so popular and such a hit that it forced Patek Philippe to follow up with the Nautilus. It forced Vacheron to follow up with the 222, which became the Overseas. It forced all of these companies that were high horology, doing complications and gold watches, to bring themselves to the steel sports watch market, a everyday watch becoming a luxury watch. So much so that they kept playing off of it. The Royal Oak became the Royal Oak Jumbo, it became the Royal Oak Offshore, the Royal Oak Offshore concept. The line became a big part of who they are and eventually created some criticism from people. The criticism being they are a one-watch brand. Sure, for a while they had the Jules Audemars line, which is a little more classic, the Millenary line, which is off the wall, and I appreciate them for doing something off the wall there. But what they are known for is the Royal Oak. That is unfair, because the front end, that may be a big part of them, but the back end is a different beast. Mention what they've done in the past for building watches for Omega and creating new types of watches than jump hour and skeleton. But they continued that throughout time. Think of Lange. It's a watchmaker that's defined modern standards of how well you can finish a watch. Well, they don't make their own case. AP makes it for them. Many people, when they need to come up with something and need help, AP is there. AP does behind the scenes more than you would realize. Not only do they make the case for Lange, but their complications department has become the home of future independent watchmakers. From one end, coming through Audemars Piguet in the entry level, you have Cameron Weiss of Weiss Watches, one I personally own and love. And then on the other side of it, you have Forcy from Grubel Forcy, the Gronfeld brothers who make fantastic Remontois watches. Those who run future watch departments. Lange's watch department is run by somebody who came from AP. TAG is run by someone who came from AP. Cartier's entire in-house watch department was built by somebody who came from AP. Even when it comes to future watch brand independents like Richard Mille, a billion-dollar independent watch brand who is known for pushing the boundaries of creating new movements with new materials, and people will comment about what they've done and how they've pushed boundaries. They didn't make their movement. AP made it. AP doesn't care just about traditional watchmaking. They care about future watchmaking too. It's something they do not get credit for. They are so much more than just the Royal Oak. So, to be perfectly honest, the Code 1159 when it came out was not a big hit. Even when I saw it the first time, I was not initially impressed. Some watches are obvious the first time you see them, what went into them. And sometimes it's a little more subtle, and that's kind of what makes a hidden gem. It's really not about the first impression of this watch, it's about when you start really taking in the details. Let's start with the movement. An automatic vertical clutch, column wheel, chronograph, and on top of it, flyback. When Audemars Piguet built this movement, they didn't do it with the consideration that this movement will fit in another case or another watch line or be used by somebody else. This movement fits with no spacers in this watch case. Not something most brands will do. The idea that you would spend this much time engineering, this much money going into this kind of movement that is done so well. When you use the chronograph pushers, it just feels butter smooth. The flyback function on this is the easiest and most confident inspiring I've come across. Usually a flyback function, you kind of really have to push and you're wondering, will that spring back break the watch? Not on this. You can tell as soon as you press it, it was meant to do that function. It was thought of before it was being built, not as an afterthought. So now the case. The most basic part of the case is just the back of the three-piece case. Except every screw hole is polished, bevel-edged, and is the kind of thing you usually only see on the inside of a high-end movement. And it's just the screw holes holding the case back in. The geometry of the mid case, they use an octagon to kind of nod to the Royal Oak. It gives a geometry that is not usually there in a mid case. It's usually just a round, one finish, move on. They created an octagon with two different finishes. It's beautifully done. And even the pushers on the side have beveled edges that have been polished. It's just these little teeny things. Every little piece is like that. The top part of the case is actually made without the lugs. The lugs are made separately, polished separately, and then soldered onto the top of the case, and the solder is then cleaned up so you never know that was there. These lugs are flying buttresses, which means that the bottoms do not touch. They're actually only attached to the case at one point, and there's just a little hairline edge at the bottom that doesn't touch the case. It's that level of detail of, we're not gonna create lugs. We're gonna create flying buttresses as lugs. It's a level of complexity that isn't done on lugs. Lugs are, again, a part of the watch that's usually an afterthought. It's something that just you attach the strap to, not another architectural detail of the watch case. And then that brings us to the sapphire. Jonathan and myself just spent about 20 minutes discussing and trying to figure out the exact shape of this crystal. The outside bends down.
It goes both.
Yeah.
12 to 6 is convex.
It's like this. But if you pop the crystal, if you pop the crystal off, yeah.
Yeah,
like
I believe
dome.
that. Like, I'm there. But
20 minutes later.
The inside of this crystal is domed, and the outside of the crystal is a convex shape from 12 to 6. What's really cool about this is not when you look straight on in the watch, but when you start looking at an angle where you'd possibly look at it on your wrist, it gives a tiered stadium effect to the dial. It gives it like an amphitheater steps. And the dial itself is where those steps may have fallen flat because it looks good, but it doesn't match all of the details of the rest of this watch. The dial is very nice. 7 layers of lacquer creates a beautiful depth. It just feels a bit simple. And I think that's what gave it kind of a bad rap at first. I know for myself, when I first saw this watch, it didn't impress me as much as it did on the second and especially third time looking at it. Looking into everything that's in this watch, where does it fit in the market? I think a good competitor is the Patek Philippe Calatrava Pilot's watch. It's also rather large, over 40 millimeters. It's made out of precious metal, in-house movement, complication. And that watch retails for about $10,000 more than this watch. Does not have anything in the way of case design that this one has. There is something about this watch that's impressive when you compare it to its high horology competition that it doesn't get that attention for on your first notice. It just flies a little under the radar, but that's why we should take an extra look sometimes. Because this one, by the time I got it in hand again and again, it just keeps impressing. Every time you look at it, there's something more to notice. And that's why for me, the CODE 1159 is a hidden gem. Hope you enjoyed learning more about the CODE 1159 and Audemars Piguet in general. If there are any other watches out there you think that didn't get enough love the first time and deserve a second look, let us know in the comments. See you next time on Hidden Gems.